Alright, I'm just gonna hide that for a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna do a G2 down 1 review. Pretty much checking out how the matchup is going to look like in my eyes, how I perceive it, how it's going to most likely play out from what I've seen so far in the groups. I'm gonna go down the matchups and then potentially, look at what the big team differences and the team weaknesses that can be exposed and might be an issue and might be a strength coming into this particular matchup. I want to start off with the junglers, because Jankos was one jungler that was very hyped up before this tournament, and he has had, honestly, a pretty poor showing. I think his first Elise game against Griffin was sublime. It was really a thing of beauty, and he managed to use his time very effectively. But then there were games where, left a sour taste in everyone's mouth because it was not the level that we were expecting or that we hoped for coming into the quarterfinals now. We had the Kiana games, we had both games against Griffin, where in G2's favor, they had a very piss-poor draft that left them with very little options. Tarzan definitely showed in the last two games that he was the better jungler. So when it comes to Jankos, definitely he has the potential to be a lot better than a lot of the junglers that Canyon played against. Basically, Canyon's opposition was Lian, Ning, and Xmithy, and three junglers that coming into the tournament we know that are big question marks. Ning, in his last game against Team Liquid, he started to come to life, played a good Gragas game. In the other games, Lian was very poor. He was non-existent. Xmithy also not that strong of a jungler. So Canyon was very effective in this group. I think what Canyon managed to do for his team, we're going to check here in the video that I prepared, is first and foremost here we have, to my point, Canyon managed to cover up a lot of the weaknesses that Damwon have. So IG had this massive issue in their games that JackeyLove and Bala never knew when to go aggro. JackeyLove throughout the group stages was dying a lot when he shouldn't. This was one replay. Next one is the next gank here between Beryl and Canyon. This was a very nice setup. It seemed like IG are playing against a champion that they don't know how to play against, and this led to a double kill. And even in this situation, there was a CS advantage in IG's favor. They're playing Ezreal against Kai'Sa. You can argue that Poppy is a very weak champion. So we don't go too much into the CS numbers, even though this is a point that I would like to make. So Canyon has had a wonderful performance this tournament, because the big thing with Damwon is that they always, their weak side tends to always give up a lot of kills. But I think this is something I will speak about later on in the video when we get to big picture stuff. So between Canyon and Jankos, I think Canyon definitely has had the better performance in terms of the group stage. I think Canyon faced a lot of weaker junglers that allowed him to really, really capitalize and get really strong and fed on the Talia, for example. I think that means a lot. But Jankos showed some glimpses of what he could do. The first Griffin game, for example, throughout the regular split, the best of 5 against Broxa. And it's important to highlight that if Jankos performs at the same level as he did against in the last two Griffin games, then Canyon will have a massive edge. But I think this is a matchup that is relatively even in terms of skill. But the big thing is that Canyon potentially has better mechanics. Jankos' mechanics on Kiana is something that leaves a lot to desire. So we'll have to see how that progresses. Next one I want to continue to is Mickey versus Beryl. I think they are very similar in terms of what they are as players. Later parts in the game, I think Beryl found very key engages on the Poppy, for example, the flash E into the Talia wall. In general, on Alistar, he has a very good eye for engages, something similar to Mickey. Mickey, coming into this tournament, I thought he had an edge because he had the bigger champion pool, but his performance has also been very lackluster in the group stages. Whether it was his Blitzcrank or his Leona seemed fine. Mickey is getting caught a lot. It's very similar to his performance in in the best of 5 against Fnatic, and this was another question that was raised about G2 and their level, something that they needed to improve on and something that they needed to fix. You have already now, as we are talking about a second player, you have inconsistencies that need to be addressed. But once again, when it comes to G2, I think I have to put a lot of emphasis in the Griffin games. They were hard outdrafted. I think their draft left very little to do in terms of options of how to play the game. So that's very important to note, and why I am trying to not take away too much from the Griffin series, because speaking of draft, I think Griffin and Damwon have a lot of similarities because, you know, I think their mid laners are very similar. Their top laners are vastly different, Sword and Nuguri. But in terms of how they figure out draft things, for example, on Blueside, I can imagine there being a Camille mid. Both top laners like to play a Kali top. Nuguri less so. It's more about those flex champions that can go in both locations, and the similarities between the Korean teams of how they want to draft. So I'm expecting G2 to come into this best of 5 with an edge in draft. So Mickey and Beryl, I think Beryl definitely looks like the stronger player so far in group stage. I don't think there's going to be that big of a variance in terms of what Mickey is going to do to be so much better than Beryl. So I think Beryl looks good. I don't think he can be exposed in any way. Nuguri versus Wunder is the next one. So I mentioned earlier for Canyon and his team, they always struggle to survive on the weak side. So a big criticism for me when it comes to Nuguri is, you know, when he is laning against, one time he laned against Aatrox, Impact, he was pretty much losing the game alone against Team Liquid. Very big problem. Also in the game against IG, you know, the first initial one, not the first initial one, but the second one, he was very fortunate with the thing that IG versus Damwon. He was very fortunate because his team, you know, IG had Syndra bottom. So IG hard trolled draft with Syndra on bottom. And once again, Nuclear got so many kills because of Canyon. Leona versus Syndra is such a free lane to gank, and they managed to snowball bottom harder than the other side managed to snowball. And this was always the case with Damwon. They're always racing against the top side, and I think when you go deeper into the tournament, this is going to be a massive issue, because if you give away these kills and the enemy, for example, bot lane, if you play into top, don't give up so many kills, and you are dying in this race, is going to be a massive issue. And always, not always, but most of the time when I'm watching Damwon play, Canyon is managing to make miracles happen together with Nuguri or the bot lane, and then the other side of the map is bleeding bad. And what it comes down to is they don't manage to play safe. They don't understand how to play safe or play around vision or build vision as a team, because I think Damwon is very selfish as a team. Selfish in the sense that they're often playing for their own lanes, and they have the players to support that. I think therein lies the difference between Damwon and SK Telecom, for example. Why SK Telecom, when they get the lane prio, they push it out and put the vision down to spread the pressure everywhere. They don't focus so much on the lane advantage, but Damwon is more of the team that goes double klepto, want to harass on the turret instead of spreading the pressure. So this always leaves Canyon with a tough job in his games, and I think as Damwon goes deeper into the tournament, it's going to be more difficult to nurture this playstyle of Damwon, where they don't really focus on spreading that pressure. And Nuguri and Wunder hasn't had the craziest tournament either. You know, I notice as we're going down the list, the players on G2, Wunder, Mickey, and Jankos haven't had the craziest tournament performance so far. I think a big thing for me was that G2 had a very hard time choosing what they wanted to blind pick. So they tried to go with the Nuguri route, with picking Kale and picking Vladimir and just going Klepto and blind picking it, but I don't think this is the way to go forward for G2. They also tried to take the Jace away from Griffin, but that just seemed like a knee-jerk reaction to what Griffin brought to the table. And this brings me worry in the sense that I think Wunder is great. I think the matchups he's been drafting himself into is what has made his performance look a lot worse. And it's very important that G2 figure out how to blind pick top, because this was a massive weakness for them in the group stage. The blind pick Vladimir, I'm not sold. Even for Nuguri, that was a struggle, and he is the Vladimir master. The Shy also is not blind picking Vladimir, I believe, unless he did it against... I think he did it against Team Liquid, but that's a different bean, right? That's a completely different bean. Team Liquid, their top laners, their top laner is a vegetarian. He's not a carnivore. He's not going to eat you alive before picking Vladimir. So that's a very different bean. So I think coming into this BO5, we have to pay attention to what the top laners blind pick, because if they will struggle to do so, maybe the power will shift to red side instead of blue, because blue has a lot more open bans, because Pantheon is a permaban, Kiana probably a permaban, and maybe Xayah will be a permaban, something like this. Red side has their hands tied, so maybe red side have some power here in the fact that it's hard to blind pick the top laners. The big thing that we saw that was probably the most powerful when it comes to blue side was when Renekton was banned. Renekton is still a great blind pick. When Renekton and GP was out, which is probably the best blind picks you can do on top, Camille and Akali flex was super powerful. It's really hard to pick something that's good into both, unless you go something cocktail. I can't think of anything right off the bat. But we saw Griffin do this one game, SKT do this one game, is something that one could do, something that G2 could do. But in general, I think Akali prior should be a lot higher when these bans start to drop in. Maybe Akali first pick is going to be a big thing in a series like this, because Akali flex is just too powerful for the draft, especially in a very lane-centric meta. So Wunder needs to figure out what to blind pick. Nuguri can be coin flip. I think he's always trying to compensate for the weaknesses that his team has. And I think, with that in mind, he's still a fantastic player, a great team fighter. Sometimes can be a liability. Wunder needs to figure out what to blind pick. If he doesn't, I think Nuguri has the edge. If he does, I think Wunder is more diverse as a player in comparison to Nuguri. He always wants to build leads. He can't take a step back, and he's not as well-rounded as, for example, Deshae or Wunder. While Nuguri, in his element, when he's allowed to play in a very aggressive way, he's really, really good. But when he has to play safe and tank some of the jungle pressure, he struggles, for sure. Jeez, I didn't realize how thirsty I was, man. Whew. Okay. So we spoke about Nuguri versus Wunder. The next one in line is Perkz versus Nuclear. So Perkz has had an amazing tournament. The Griffin draft in last game, like picking Zoe Shen versus Xayah Rakan, just good luck. Go next. Zoe sucks against that. You're playing Zoe against Ornn, Xayah Rakan. What was there else? I think there was a freaking... I'm just gonna bring the draft up right here. It's Griffin, tiebreaker. So if this is your draft, so you can see here G2, which is going to be a point of mine later, is their adaptation between the games was very poor, in the sense that here they're just picking 3 of the champions that the enemy picked. Jankos on Kiana doesn't look ready at all, even though he played one game in the past that looked kind of good. This was a disaster. This game was a disaster. The previous game of Kiana he played was a disaster, and this entire team composition is just completely countered by Xayah, Rakan, Galio, and then last pick Ornn. Just Ornn Ultimate is getting so much value here, and Griffin adapted way better between the series than G2 did, because this removing the Rakan ban, leaving Kiana open, Kiana first pick for Xayah Rakan was just deadly. Absolutely deadly. Sorry, I didn't show it. Okay, imagine that it was showing the entire time, but here you can see it now. Pardon me. Production value. EU production. Xayah Rakan, Lee, Galio, Ornn versus this. If you play Jace against this, GG. If you play Zoe against this, Cassio, GG. It's really difficult. Even Kiana, she wants to buy full lethality. There's many targets there that can buy armor. It's super difficult. You know, this was the rough game for Perks. But even in this game, he pulled off this amazing play where he survived with Zoe for so long. And I think Perks has been absolutely amazing this tournament. And when I look at Nuclear, I think he has had an okay performance just because IG allowed him to. So IG had the game where they played Syndra, and that was, you know, a disaster. You know, I think Syndra is a big myth. If you're a bot laner, a lot of bot laners cannot play Syndra. So this one, you know, this was a freebie for Nuclear. Every game Nuclear played against IG, he got so much camp. It's, you know, it helps a lot that Damon's coach was IG's coach. So it feels like he's completely in their mind. He knows what to focus on. He knows how to get leads. And Jackie Love and Baolan was definitely exposed as big inters in the IG series. And this allowed Nuclear on his Kai'Sa, always his Kai'Sa. He gets through and he does well. Because even in the game against IG, Nuclear manages to make it super difficult. Because if we fast forward in this game that I have open here, in this game, Nuclear manages to run it down. Let me just find this particular moment. I think it's right here. So we fast forward a bit. Fast forward a little bit more. Here, game is pretty rough, and then Nuclear manages to get caught. He doesn't have that same power with the big advantage that he had here as some of the other ADs at this tournament, or no longer at this tournament, might have. Sucks for Uzi, honestly. Or it's just a small point. I think Nuclear got a freebie in his group because of how effective Canyon was. Because even in these games, Nuclear was behind many times. Nuclear is definitely the weakness, and I think Perks has a massive edge here. Massive edge. And it all comes down to how effective Canyon can be. So I think Perks, big advantage. 5-star. Perks has had an amazing tournament. Beautiful Zaya. Beautiful performance in general. Beautiful Kai'Sa. Good Zoe is just rough draft. You know, I think Perks has been amazing. You know, in the midst of all the question marks for G2 and all of the people that are underperforming, I think Caps is definitely a fantastic performer. I think Caps has played super well. I think he has played much better than he did in the best of 5 against Fnatic, because that one was something where he kind of struggled to come online. I don't like how little emphasis G2 has had on the 2v2 mid, because this was a big criticism of mine when it came to G2, that the 2v2 mid is kind of left behind, and I think this is something that G2 needs to put focus on again, because I've heard some rumors from scrims that, you know, it's G2 is the deadliest when they give Caps what he wants. So I hope this happens. And I think when it comes to Caps' impact on the map and Caps' split pushing, it has been absolutely beautiful. Very nice. Remember, his Rise performance was very good. He roams a lot, impacts the map a lot, and I am very content with how Caps has performed. And I think when it comes to Caps versus Showmaker, Showmaker laning-wise is definitely super good. Super good. Lane-wise, Showmaker is one of the best in the world, for sure. But once again, he's the type of player that plays for himself, and sometimes that's enough. He finds one roam in that game to defend a turret dive, gets a triple kill, you know, God bless him, that's cool. But Caps is the type of player that uses his push, uses his lead to spread it across the map, and this is the overall trend of G2, that they spread their pressure. They spread their pressure better, and I think this is something that is a big strength for G2 in comparison to Damwon. They are very focused on getting a big lane advantage, focusing on that lane, breaking the tower, and then afterwards spread the pressure. G2, when they get the lead, all of a sudden they try to suffocate you all over the map. And I think that's a better way of playing the game. I think this is why SKT sometimes is better. I think this is why Fnatic did very well. I think this is why G2 is regarded very highly. So now this is a good transition into the overall team weaknesses and strengths. I mentioned many times already Damwon struggle to play the weak side of the map. Meaning, if they decide, okay, we play through mid into bottom, we're going to pressure here, we're going to find some ganks on the Syndra bot with the Leona, the other side of the map tends to bleed very, very bad. Unless they're getting many, many kills on the other side of the map, they should struggle. And I think as we go further into the quarters, and semis, teams are going to be much better at reacting, because I think IG had a massive problem in the fact that they just kept dying on bot lane and made Nuclear super, super monster fed. Otherwise, I think IG looked like the better team. Also, they play for themselves with just sometimes strength, meaning Nuguri and Showmaker can get big leads 1v1 in their lanes, but it doesn't spread as well as something as, for example, a G2 lead. When Caps gets a lead, he pressures the whole map. Showmaker, when he gets a lead, focuses on continuing to build that lead, which he does very, very well. Sometimes he tries to roam, but less so than Caps. Maybe this is something that Showmaker can change. Maybe it's a mindset thing. But it seemed the mindset for Damwon when they came in was Nuguri, Showmaker carry, let's see what happens. And then the second week they started to gank bottom heavy, and that worked too. So Damwon definitely have different approaches to how they play the game. And I just think when it comes to Damwon and building leads on bottom, it relies on the enemy really running it down. And that's what happened against IG. IG ran it down. And I think G2 can be a lot smarter when it comes to both their picks and also how they survive the ganks and play around jungle. G2 had a massive problem in terms of drafting. I mentioned this as well. Against Griffin, draft was a massive issue. If it continues the same way, then Damwon is going to win out on draft alone. G2, in the way that they speak in interviews, it seems like they're holding back on some strategies, and they knew they were going into quarters. They're playing to win the whole tournament, so they were holding things back. Let's see if they have things prepared. I had high hopes for G2 in best of 5 against Fnatic, and they were kind of disappointing, because last year between the best of 5s, this year in spring between the best of 5s, they definitely leveled up, and the second best of 5 against OG, they completely decimated them. This year, I felt like, this split, Fnatic leveled up much more than G2 and made the series very competitive. So G2 need to cut the bullshit, need to cut the excuses, because it's been very long now while they always say, oh, we were inting, we were running it down, we need to do better, it's time to play good. Well, now is the time. G2 is giving me a lot of worries, but it's very clear that the players that have experience in playing MSI and Worlds in the same year have found their form, because it's very different than going to Worlds without being at MSI and going to MSI and then Worlds. That is very, very painful. It's very, very exhausting as a schedule. Perks and Caps have experience in doing this, so it's very evident here that it's working in their favor in terms of what they're showing on stage. But Wunder, Mickey, and Jankos, they haven't shown their peak level, and I think a lot of that starts in draft. Mickey needs to find his comfort again. Jankos needs to find a way to draft away from Kiana and maybe stick to that Elise, because I think Elise is a very powerful pick. And hopefully G2 can adapt and do better in the drafts. Because once again, between the series G2 and Griffin, first game they got outdrafted, second game they tried to make panic adjustments, pick the Shen themselves, pick the Jace, and also pick Kiana, and they got demolished anyway because Griffin was miles ahead. So if Damwon are playing to their level and G2 continues in the same way, where they are making these mistakes, where they're getting caught, Damwon is going to be victorious. But I think G2, based on the fact that they are playing better as a team, they are finding advantages together, and they're spreading pressure better. I think in a best of 5 that is going to be very beneficial for them. The experience that is on this roster is amazing, and Damwon has very little experience on the roster. I think G2 is going to take it. So my prediction is going to be a 3-1 for G2. There's going to be one game at least where G2 completely run it down. We have to also accept that there is a world where Damwon wins the series because G2 have made excuses for just too long. they've made excuses for too long. Their bullshit, about, oh, we underperformed, just lasts. Maybe the reality is going to hit them. They are standing there at match point and they're realizing, holy shit, we need to do this or die. And them always saying, oh, we entered, maybe that's going to be a problem. But in the series against Fnatic, when they were staring at in the eye of the match point, they managed to come through. And I think it came down to how smart their decision making was at later parts in the game, in mid game to late game, even in the games that they were behind. Wunder, when it's necessary, really steps up. I remember his Kled games, I remember his Rise games, and in a series like this is going to be necessary. And I think G2, even though I'm quite harsh with them now, there's been times where they've stared down the barrel of a gun and they pulled through against SK Telecom or against Fnatic. It has happened, and that is why I have a lot of faith in G2 coming into this matchup. So we mentioned all the players, the potential weaknesses of both teams. Draft is going to play a fundamental role. I think Akali prior should be very high for both. Blueside and redside, how the dynamic happens and evolves in terms of what both teams are going to blind pick is going to be super interesting too. Because coming into this, I think what G2 can do is prepare a lot of specific champion against Damwon, because their draft, they're blind picking Vladimir, they're blind picking Kai'Sa. If they find the right counters, G2 can enable themselves through draft already, because Damwon's draft might be very predictable. As I said, high Akali prior, Vladimir blind pick. They had the Talia Renekton combo. Maybe there's some counters there that G2 can find, because I think when the enemy is predictable, that's when G2 do best. And Damwon have a very clear formula for how they want to play. If Canyon manages to be as effective in the groups as he managed to do against Lian, Ning, and Xmithy, then he's been fantastic. But I'm reserving my judgment of Canyon because he played against weaker junglers. Ning and Lian weren't putting out much of a show at all. And Xmithy is Xmithy. God bless him. So this was a bit of a longer video. I wasn't too happy about the FPX one, and hopefully some of this makes sense. So if you watched till the end, bless you, bless your face, bless your cats, bless your dogs, bless your grandma. If you haven't talked to her in a while, call her up. If you can't, then think about it for a moment. That's good too. Sorry for bringing bad memories up, so pardon me. All the best to you. Bless your soul.